Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast number 324. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the morning of Saturday, August the 5th, from the James Strong Studio in Western St. Charles County. Didn't have a podcast last week, but then you know that. If you saw my posts on Facebook, you'll know why. The trophy wife and I took a vacation. In fact, it was our 40th wedding anniversary vacation, and we've been gone for 10, 11 days, 12 days. the number of days, it's a blur now because we did so much during our time. But basically, we took a cruise, a river cruise on the Danube River, starting in Budapest, Hungary, and ending up in Regensberg, Germany, which is very close to Munich. And it was a wonderful trip, a trip of a lifetime. In fact, you know my motto. You should take the trip of a lifetime 3 times a year. This was the third one we took, so maybe this is it until next year. I don't know for sure, but this was certainly a trip of a lifetime. Now, my motto has always been good enough never is, and it's been a true dual-edged sword for me. What I mean by that is if you take the attitude of good enough never is, then you're going to have excellence throughout your life. However, there's a price to pay for that excellence sometimes. Sometimes that means you wear yourself down too much. You think through too many things. Your head does not stay screwed on straight because you never truly accomplish a goal, because if good enough never is, you can never say good enough because it never is. Okay. So sometimes that attitude can, what should I say? Get in the way of smiling. Okay. It is a dual-edged sword. But this time we both put a lot of time, effort, and investigation into this trip to make sure it was going to truly be exactly as we wanted. We decided on this trip 18 months ago, decided that we're going to do it 18 months ago, paid for it a year ago. If you remember, unless your memories are too short, during that time in the world, we were smack dab in the middle of COVID. And absolutely nobody wanted to take a Central European river cruise. So I'm not saying they dropped their pants and gave us a bargain basement price, but they did give us an extremely good deal. I will just say that. And it was on, did I say it was on Viking? Viking was the river cruise company. And I think they're about the biggest. And I had talked to lots of people about river cruises. And every time I had talked to somebody who had been on one, you saw their eyes light up and they said, oh my gosh, you've got to go. They're fantastic. They're wonderful. You'll never do anything like it. And I said, okay, we're considering Viking. And almost to a person, they all smiled even bigger and said, you know what? If a river cruise is the best, Viking is the best of the best. Nobody said anything bad about them. Everybody said everything good about them. So another one of my mottos is 1 billion Chinese can't all be wrong. So if everybody I know, people that I respect and know and respect, if they were all giving thumbs up on this trip, you know what? Let's do it. So we did. I will tell you something else about these Viking cruises that is an observation. And I'm not trying to compare myself to our Lord Jesus Christ, but I'll tell it in a parable, okay? A long time ago, as a young man, I took a trip with California Dave out into the desert, and we went to Palm Springs. And I was probably 30, maybe early 30s, late 20s, early 30s, something like that, okay? Probably early 30s. And we went to Palm Springs, just driving through because that was in the desert. And I didn't like Palm Springs. Reason being, it was kind of stuffy and it was full of old people, okay? Didn't like Palm Springs, full of old people. 20, 24 years later, I went back to Palm Springs again. And guess what? Something had changed. It all of a sudden wasn't a place for old people. It was a place for people like me. There were good things to do, good restaurants, et cetera, et cetera. The translation is, Palm Springs didn't change, my friends. I did. So when I was a young man, I thought Palm Springs was a place for old people. When I became older, Palm Springs was just fine. They hadn't changed, but I had. And Viking cruises are kind of that way. While I'm not going to say it's not a geriatric cruise at all, it is a cruise for older people. So Palm Springs catering to old people, older people, maybe I'll say. Viking cruises catering to older people, same. Now our trip started off. I mean, when you book one of these things, everything is included. I mean, just about everything. Okay. Sure. If you want to go out and have a beer during the afternoon, that's on you. If you want to belly up to the bar on the boat and you haven't paid for the alcohol package, then that's on you. But for the most part, everything's covered. And when I say everything, I mean, we had to get ourselves to the St. Louis airport. We had to get ourselves home from the St. Louis airport. Other than that, everything else was covered. They pick you up at the airport. They take you to the hotel. They take you to the boat. They bring you to and from the boat. They take you to the airport. There's somebody at the airport telling you what to do, and everything was absolutely perfect. It's choreographed perfectly, and it's made for older people who maybe haven't done something like that in the past. But our trip, originally, we left on Tuesday, the 25th of July. And our original trip was supposed to be St. Louis to Newark, New Jersey airport to Munich, okay? And then from Munich to Budapest. That was the original trip. So my father graciously picked us up at the house, dropped us off at the airport, walked up to the window with plenty of time, and the flight attendant on United, because we're flying United and Lufthansa Airlines, the flight attendant at the United desk said, yeah, well, sorry, but this trip has been, your flight's been canceled. And I just looked at her, and I started, all of a sudden, already I'm starting to the blood pressure's going up. She says, don't get excited yet. And she's clicking away. She says, I got a flight for you to Houston. So we can go St. Louis to Houston, Houston to Frankfurt to Budapest. In fact, it'll get you there a little bit earlier than the flight through Newark and Munich. Great. Then somebody whispers in her ear. She says, sorry, that flight was canceled too. And so again, she sees the look on my face. She says, but still don't panic. And she was clicking. And I could have asked her more questions, but that would have solved no problem. I thought, look, this lady's doing her best to get us where we need to be. I'm going to leave her alone. Finally, she says, I've got a trip for you. And this was St. Louis to Washington Dulles to Frankfurt to Budapest, and we're scheduled to arrive 3 hours sooner than had we had our original itinerary, which was fantastic. We got on the plane, and I flew United, and I've not flown United very often, okay? I have before, and I will tell you that it was never a great experience, mainly because I fly almost exclusively Southwest and American. I have status on both of those airlines, which means you get the special line. They treat you with kid gloves because I'm a million miler on American, and I'm whatever the grand poobah is on Southwest too, because I use those airlines so often, and they treat you, like you're the king. Okay, United, I've flown it once or twice. You're just get in line with the rest of the great unwashed. But I will tell you, the flight from St. Louis to Dulles was fine. The flight from Dulles to Munich was a beautiful, practically new Boeing 777, which is a magnificent plane. The flight attendants were kind. The seats were comfortable. The food was pretty good. They kind of limited the booze a lot, which maybe was a good thing because a lot of these airlines, if you fly American, they give you all the booze you want. I drink all the booze I want plus some, and I wake up with a hangover. I mean, I get on the plane, I get off the plane and to my destination, I'm already hungover, which is not a good thing. So they only gave you a little bit of booze, which I thought was just fine. All things considered. Decent food. The entertainment system was fine. The seats were fairly comfortable. No problems with United at all. Okay. We land in Budapest. Actually, we land in Frankfurt. Long layover in Frankfurt. Then fly to Budapest, go through customs. Actually, we went through customs in Frankfurt because both Germany, where Frankfurt is located, and Budapest is in Hungary, which is where our final destination was. They're both what they call Schengen countries in the EU. In other words, it's more like a state than a country. And if you pass through immigration in Frankfurt, that's fine with Budapest too. So it all worked out great. We landed at the hotel. There's a guy to get from Viking to give us our to get us on the bus, tell us where to go. Fill out paperwork, put our tags on the bag so they wind up in our stateroom on the boat. And we go to the hotel, so they go to our hotel rooms in the hotel because we were staying there 2 days before we got onto the boat. And so basically they drive us to the hotel. We get there, we go to our rooms, luggage shows up. We have a little introductory tour of the city from the folks at Viking. And then we're on our own. Went out to eat dinner and basically had a fantastic dinner in Budapest. We were tired, but had a little nap on the plane. Plus, you're in a new, exciting place. You're in Budapest, Hungary. So you don't go to sleep. You have a coffee and have an adventure. And so we went out and had dinner at a place not too far, within walking distance. Again, they give you a little walking tour. Where do we want to eat? Go down that street. You'll find plenty of places. We went back to the room, washed up, went to the restaurant, had a good dinner, and all was good. In fact, the food in Budapest, a lot of goulash, a lot of paprika chicken, a lot of Eastern or Western, not Western, but Eastern and Central European food. Good beer, good wine, etc. Next day in Budapest, we did have a tour of the city. And Budapest is one of the few countries that I've been in that still has bullet holes in the building from World War II. The tour guide made a big deal about how Hungary suffered under Nazi occupation. What they never mentioned was that Hungary was one of the original Axis countries, and they only changed sides when the handwriting was on the wall near the end of the war. That's when the Nazis came in and occupied them because they were trying to go on the side of the Allies. But there was a lot of fighting in Budapest, and they did not level the city, but there were only facades standing quite often. They were bombed out. And it's funny because I asked the question, I said, well, you said this cathedral was built in the 1300s and it's still standing kind of looking like that. They said, yeah, it wasn't destroyed in the war, but it was very much damaged. And when they redo these buildings, they redo them with the old architecture, which is something you hear the thing, well, they can't build them like this anymore. Yeah, they still do. And it costs a lot of money, but they still do it, which is very cool. But Budapest was a fantastic city. We did like we do with all these tours, or did with all these tours. They give you a day tour, which is kind of like a 3.5, between 2 and 3.5 hour tour, which depending on the size of the city, a big city like Budapest or Vienna, those were 3.5 hour tours. Then you go back, decide what you're going to do, and the places that they touched on that you wanted to visit more, you did that. You went to the coffee house you saw. You went to the pub that you saw. You went ahead and toured a museum or a cathedral that you went past that you wanted to tour again, or just wander about and just look at the sights. When you see these cities that are 1,000 years old, the history is just unbelievable. You'll see more history in a block of one of these places than you'll see in the Midwestern U.S. in your lifetime. There's just so much history there, okay? But again, I talked about the Viking tours and how they'll give you a tour. Every day we got a day tour. That was part of the deal. Most every day you got a tour. And they touch on the highlights, and then you go back and explore the rest of it. The whole Viking tour deal was very well organized and very well regimented. It was practical and nice, but not opulent. The cabins, as you would figure, they're very small, but they were perfectly engineered. I mean, we had plenty of room in this place. Now, of course, I'm sharing it with my wife where we know one another's idiosyncrasies, and we've lived together for over 40 years, so we know how one another operate, and we're a bit more tolerant. So if you're sharing it with somebody you just met last week, it might not be so great. But I mean, the showers were good. Everything was very clean. I can't stress that enough. Clean, clean, clean. The food was fantastic, but not over the top. Plenty of food to eat, but I will tell you that the servings at dinner were rather small, but the food was very tasty. You never walked away hungry, but this wasn't a pig fest either. In fact, they mentioned, look, this isn't your regular cruise ship. If you're here to feed your face, get sloppy drunk, and then go to the casino, go someplace else, because that's not what this is all about. We have none of that there, and they didn't, and we weren't looking for that. The package we chose only included beer and wine with lunch and dinner. Now, you could buy the booze package for $350 a person, and they push this. You know what? If you like to have a few drinks at night, it's well worth it. Well, if you've had a beer or two with lunch and a beer or two with dinner, and then you went out during the afternoon and went to the wine gardens or the beer gardens, you've already had enough beer, in my opinion. So we didn't go with that package. But again, a beer or two at lunch and dinner, and then at the beer garden out in the city during the afternoon, that's plenty of booze for me, okay? The wine they served was all local wine. So whatever city you were in, they got wine from that area. And they served it in good wine glasses, which is so rare for restaurants nowadays. Schott Zweigel wine glasses, which is high-end stuff. Now, most places, if you've had wine in most restaurants, they'll serve it in big, thick juice glasses with stems, okay? And when I see something like that, I'm thinking, it just, to me, a nice wine glass can make an average wine extraordinary. An extraordinary wine, unbelievable. That's what the right wine glass will do. And these folks used the right wine glasses. Beer, the same way. You couldn't get every beer that you wanted, but this is Central Europe. This is not like they don't have 47 beers on tap, okay? They had one beer on tap. It was Bitburger, which is a good German beer. And it was served in an official Bitburger glass with the 0.4 liter mark near the top, and they hit the mark every time, just like Europeans do. And it was good quality glassware, which I know I may be just beating this to death, but if you're going to have a good beer and if you're going to have a good wine, it has to be drunk in a proper glass. If you serve a Opus 1 Cabernet in a coffee cup, sorry folks, but it's not going to be anything special. That's just how, and these people did it that way. It was just done in a wonderful way, and it was done right. The other thing they did that I liked a lot, they published every day what they call the Viking Daily, and it's a 4-page document that tells you what we're going to do, who's going to do it, how you're going to do it, and give you options to do other stuff that you have to pay extra for if you want to. I will tell you something else. While this Viking company is a Norwegian company, it's a Norwegian company, but they're headquartered in Switzerland, and they run it like the Germans. Everything is on time. Nothing is late. Everything has a timestamp, and you better review that itinerary carefully. You have a document. They mention it at the briefing the night before, and they make announcements when the bus is going to leave, or the walking tour, whether they have a walking tour or a bus, when it's going to leave. And you best not be late, because if they say it leaves at 8:15 and you show up at 8:20, that bus is gone. It's gone. Now, that's not a huge deal because you missed the tour. But when they say to pick up the bus at a certain time and you're not there, that bus is gone, okay? Let me give you an example. One of the towns we visited was a German town called Passau, okay? And we boarded, we docked in Passau, had our breakfast. Then we had a quick walking tour because it's not a big city, okay? Came back, had lunch on the boat. Then we took a note of what we saw on the tour. Then we went out and went into some beer gardens, some churches, some museums, and it was fun. But they said, here's the thing. The boat leaves Passau at 2:30. If you want to stay in Passau a little longer, there's a bus that will pick you up at a certain place at 5:30 and drive you to where the boat's going to be, because the boat was going to dock in a place for a little while, then take off and go to the next town later that night after dinner. But they also said that bus will leave at 5:30. They said if you're not on that bus at 5:30 and you miss it, you'll need to pay somebody to drive you the hour to Vienna, because that's the next town, okay, or whatever the next town was going to be, I forget. But they were very, very explicit about that. And in fact, our bus was supposed to leave at 5:30, and we did leave a little late. We pulled out at 5:32. The tour director made a quick count. He says, you know what, I think we've got everybody, but maybe we do, maybe we don't, because when you leave the boat, you're supposed to check out, and you're supposed to check in so they know where everybody is, but everybody doesn't do that. So they say our count is pretty close. We're going to leave. And they did. And 2 people weren't on the bus. Now, what they will do is they give you a card, and the card has the cruise line, the boat, and the personal phone number of the tour director. So if you ever get lost or miss your bus and you're someplace and you don't know what to do, you call the tour director on his cell phone. And the tour director said, where are you? They told him. He arranged to have a cab pick them up and drive them to where the boat was. And they had to pay the cab fare because they missed the boat. I personally had no problem with that. I like structure. If they say we're leaving at 5:30, and you're not, and it's 5:45 and you're not gone, I'm upset because somebody else is doing something that I would love to be doing, but now I'm having to wait because they're inconsiderate. This thing ran like a Swiss watch. Well, it's a company based in Switzerland, so I guess it did. I liked it. Something else about this trip. We were some of the youngest people on the boat. No children are allowed. And most everybody on the trip were just ladies and gentlemen. And there were a couple people who were kind of like Debbie Downers, but who knows? Maybe they were having a bad day. But they were nice people. The pay structure. You pay so much. Airfares included. Transfers are included. Your tours are included. Your meals are included. Beer and wine at lunch and dinner are included. But if you want extra, you pay extra. You want extra booze, you pay extra. You want an extra trip, you pay for it. You want to stay over like we did. We went early and stayed in Budapest extra. You pay for it. But it's kind of like, here's what you pay for. And if you want more, you just add on. So it can cost you, I'm not going to lie to you, it's not cheap. You're either going to pay a lot or a whole lot for this trip. But it's just, there's no surprises. And that's the best thing. You know what it's going to cost. And they're not going to say, oh yeah, by the way, here's an extra $400 charge for something that you had no idea was coming. We did not get that. Meals, again, were typical European meals. For breakfast, you had local breads that are made fresh. You had ham, cheese, meats that you put on the bread. Then you had sweets, you had coffee, you had smoked salmon, which is that's the Central European breakfast. Now, if you didn't like them, they'll still cook you an egg. They had bacon. They had sausage and beans for the Brits. They had just about everything that you'd want, and it was fine. If you didn't, they had so many selections that if you didn't find what you liked, there was a problem. Lots of fruit, lots of yogurt, muesli, fruits and nuts, a little something special from the region each day. Lunch was the same way. Dinner was the same way. Dinner, you had a choice. You could pick from column number 1, column number 2, column number 3. They had a starter, they had a main course, they had a dessert. If you wanted an extra salad, you could throw that in too if you wanted to. Like I said, lunch was that way. Dinner was that way too. And they always had a nice dessert. The coffee house was always open with a cookie or a cake there you could have if you got a sweet tooth. But it was fantastic. Just the way they ran it was very organized, which I like structure and organization. If you like that and respect that, then you'll like these tours. Like I said, our first day was in Budapest, and we spent 3 days there, almost 4. The money is the Hungarian forint, and their exchange rate is 340 to 1. So, I mean, they're an EU country, they're a NATO country, but they haven't adopted the euro. Not all these countries have, okay? Most things were inexpensive. Again, we were there a couple days before we were on the boat, so dinner wasn't included. We were on our own for dinner. And dinner was, we had a very nice dinner. The trophy wife had paprika chicken. I had a goulash dish. I had a beer. She had a glass of wine. With tip and tax, it was $50, which you're going to pay that and then some here in the States. Happy hour. We went to a pub that had happy hour, and they had the local draft beer that was, if you did the exchange rate, it was just under $3 a liter. What is a liter, you say? Well, a liter is about a quart, basically. Yeah. There's 3.75 liters to the gallon. So a little more than a quart of beer for less than $3. I'm not ashamed to tell you that the happy hour beer garden was packed, mainly with Brits and Australians, drinking the local beer at $3 a liter. But it was a nice place. We enjoyed it, sitting in the nice warm sun and enjoying a beer and watching the sights in Budapest. We then went from Budapest to Vienna, and again, you get to Vienna. We took the little 3.5-hour city tour, so they let you know, hey, here's that. If you want to do this, do it this way. And by the way up there, that's the town square. You're best served to take the subway. And they give you a document as to how to work the subway. And basically, if you've ever worked the Metrolink system in the St. Louis area, it's exactly the same. You go up to a kiosk, which, unlike here in the States, they have every language known to man. You hit the English button. It tells you what to do. Okay, do you want a ticket from here to there? Do you want a daily pass? You want a weekly pass? Well, we just wanted a ticket from here to there. So you put it in. You pay your €2, 20 euro cents. It spits out a ticket. You take it. You validate it. You walk on the subway and you do your thing. Very easy to operate. Very easy to navigate. Inexpensive to use, and that's how we got around Vienna, just on the subway. We'd take the subway to St. Stephen's Square. We'd take the subway to where the museums were, and go into the museums. When we're done, we get back on the subway. We go back to the boat, and it worked out very well. The big thing about Vienna, Vienna was like Austria. I'm sorry, Vienna was like Budapest. They had a St. Stephen's Cathedral. And you think, well, why would they have a St. Stephen's Cathedral in both cities? Well, St. Stephen's was the founder of the country. And at once upon a time, it was the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, where they had 60 million people under that rule. I think Austria and Hungary both have less than 9 million people in their country now, maybe 6 million in Hungary. But once upon a time, the Hungarian-Austrian Empire was a big deal. Coffee houses and beer gardens were the big things in Vienna. And we also spent the day in their history museum. But the coffee houses in Vienna, they stressed you need to go to a coffee house. And we went to two. Went to a place called Hawelka, Hawelka, and another one called Sacher, spelled Sacher. These were two of the 5 or 6 that, if you're in Vienna, you got to go to that coffee house. And Sacher is where they have the what they call the Sachertorte, the Vienna chocolate cake. And you have a coffee and a chocolate cake, and they give you a little glass of water too. You're going to pay about €9 for that, but that's what things cost in Vienna. But you sip the coffee, you eat the cake, you sip the water, and you watch life go by the square. Actually, it's quite fun. So if you go to Vienna, sure, you want to go to a Vienna coffee house. And they have beer gardens too. Beer gardens are about what you would expect. But the coffee houses especially, I think, were worth doing. In Europe, when you have a coffee, first of all, they told you, don't go into a coffee house and order a coffee. They won't know what you're talking about. Because when you order a coffee, you have to order a type of coffee. And you can Google it and figure out what they mean, but the types of coffee it's like most German words, they're a block long. But then this means coffee with cream and sugar. This means with coffee and chocolate and milk. And they all mean something else. And the cup of coffee is quite small. 3 ounces, maybe 4. That's it. So you're not going to Starbucks and getting a 20-ounce Bente Pike place, okay? That's not what their coffee's all about. It's like anything else in Europe. It's small and very tasty. So it's meant to, you sit, you relax, you sip, you nibble, and you take a deep breath and you unwind. That's what you do at the coffee houses. But Vienna was very nice, very beautiful. It's about what you would think. Tons of history because of all of the classical musicians that have been from Vienna. Strauss was one of them. I think Mozart was close to there. Lots of history, lots of chapels, cathedrals, lots of palaces. Just unbelievable history, just like every place else there. The next day we sailed to Krems up the Danube, because we stayed on the Danube the whole time, never left the Danube River, all the way from Budapest to Regensberg. But in Krems, which is a small town in Austria, we actually visited the Gottwig Abbey. Now, something about this place is the church and the state were one. And in fact, the crosses on the churches have 2 horizontal bars on the cross. And we asked, why 2? They said, well, one of them is for the bishop and the other one is for the king, because they were hand in hand. There was no separation of church and state. Church and state were exactly the same. And the king and the bishop ruled those areas in tandem. And this abbey, this Gottwig Abbey, first of all, it was founded in 1083. And many of the old structures were still there. They had been rebuilt, but some of them, the frescoes were still there on the inside. Just unbelievable history. And it sits on top of a hill just outside of the town of Krems. And they said, okay, look around 360 degrees. Basically, everything you see is still owned by the abbey. And you think to yourself, well, that's just an astronomical amount of property. How could they have that much property? Well, something you have to remember, in 1083, there was not a whole lot around this area. There were people, but there really were no towns. And the people had little farms, but there were also raiders involved back then. The Ottomans came in. Different groups would just come in and just rape and pillage a city. And who had the big buildings? The king and the bishop. So you paid your tax to the king and the bishop, and they went ahead and protected you. They went to battle for you. They let you come inside the castle walls in case there was something going on. So it was more or less the bishop and the king owned everything, let people live on it, and protected the people. So that's why they owned so much property back then. We drank wine from an abbey that had apricot schnapps, apricot juice, different wine, grapes from different wines. It was fantastic. And to this day, that's how the abbey still makes its money, by growing the apricots and the grapes and making wine. Now, they had 35 monks in this abbey, so it's not like the old days. The monks weren't going out there picking grapes, okay? The monks weren't stomping the grapes in a big vat and then pouring it into the bottom. No, there was none of that. People do that. They have staff for all that. But then they have just enough set up so that it works out very well. The next day, we sailed to Germany, to the town of Passau. Again, quick walk through the city. More castles, more cathedrals. Passau is a city in Germany where they're at the confluence of three rivers: the Danube, the Inn, and the Ilz River. And the Ilz River flows in from the mountains, and the water is actually black, and it's black from the biological stuff, what would you say, like the humus soil that it flows through. And if you stand on the hill, you can see the black water from the Ilz River coming into the Danube and the Inn River. The town of Passau is built on a peninsula, and it floods. In fact, it flooded huge in 2013. And somebody asked the question, and the answer was very interesting, very European. The question was asked of the tour guide: well, if this thing flooded so bad, do people here have flood insurance? Of course, that was an American that asked that question. And the guide said, well, no, of course not. That would be too expensive. And then the question was asked, well, what do these people do to rebuild their houses? They said, well, first of all, usually only for the first 4 floods, so they build accordingly. They move their stuff upstairs, wait till the water goes down, clean up the mess, put everything back, and everything's stone, so it's not like it's wood. So everything's fine. They also said, look, Passau was a big trading city. It still is. And if you own a house on the banks of the Danube or the Inn or the Ilz River, you're a very rich person. You make more money than most because you have a hotel, you have a trading center, you have a store, you have something. So you have more money than most people. And people understand that, you know what? Because I'm by the river, I make more money. But because I'm by the river, things flood. Translation: set aside some money for when things flood. Plus, he also said that the state helps you out too. So there's always the social welfare state as well. But no, people don't have insurance. It's interesting. The last town we went to was Regensberg. We did the walk through the city, more castles, more churches. There's a sausage shop there that's been in continuous operation since 1320, believe it or not, called Burschkulchi. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but Google Regensburg, Germany sausage house, and you'll see something about that. More beer gardens. We visited the Bischofshof Brewery, which has been in operation since the 1300s. Bischofshof means the bishop's house. In other words, the bishop owned the brewery. Still does. Really good beer. In fact, the trophy wife took a picture of me drinking some of that beer, and it looks like a posed picture that belongs on the back pages of Der Spiegel magazine advertising the beer. But again, fantastic beer. Fantastic. Again, you sit there, you sip a beer, you take everything in, you relax. It's wonderful. It's marvelous. Now, by now, this is Thursday, August the 3rd. And like I said before, we left on Tuesday the 25th. And the trophy wife made an interesting observation. This was our last full day on the trip. And she said, this Regensberg town is fine, but really it's just another small town with lots of castles and cathedrals and narrow streets and history and beer and coffee. Translation was same. This is the third straight town that basically was about the same, just a different spot on the Danube. So what does that really mean? That really means we've had enough and it was time to go home. And sure enough, the next morning, Friday the 5th, it was time to go home. So we took a bus to Munich, went from Munich to Detroit airport, then Detroit to St. Louis, home by 6:30, unpacked, take a bath, went to bed because we both stayed awake the whole time on the trip. The takeaway on this trip, and again, when I do these podcasts on my vacations, you should know by now that it is not to rub your nose in it. Say, hear me, I'm Mr. Big Shot, I did this, you haven't done this, I'm better than you. No, it's not that at all. Again, I mentioned more than once that my goal is to have the adventure of a lifetime at least 3 times a year. You should do the same. I take these trips, I review them so that you can listen to them and say, hey, maybe this is for me, maybe it's not. Okay. So my takeaway for this trip, I'll give you things to consider if you're considering a river cruise. And I'll say a river cruise on Viking because Viking is the river cruise company we used. Long story short, we loved it. We're going to do it again. Not anytime soon, however. In fact, the only thing, I wouldn't say it was a drawback, but near the end of the trip, they hard sell you on booking your next trip now. Here's a deal that, like a timeshare. Here's your deal that if you don't take this deal now, if you walk off this ship, that deal is done. Okay. Didn't really like that, but that's okay. I understand how sales works. We're going to do it again, but no time soon. Well, because while I mentioned that this was a very good value for what you get, please, dear listeners, don't confuse a good value for something cheap. It wasn't cheap. It wasn't cheap. Okay. It may be out of the reach for many of you. This is not something the trophy wife and I do every year or every few years. But you know what? If she stayed married to me for 40 years, she deserves something, right? You would think. And so we may do something like this for our 45th or something like that. Okay. Again, good value, but not cheap. I will also tell you that you will meet a lot of new people on these cruises. You can't avoid it. The tables, they're set up to a minimum 6 people per table. The round ones are all 6. Then you've got long tables where you're family style, where if you're sitting next to your significant other, you're going to be sitting across from other people. So lots of fun, vibrant people. In fact, I would say most everyone we met on this cruise were fun, vibrant people. If you just want a nice, quiet, romantic trip where you and your mate can have a nice, quiet, personal, romantic vacation and not really be around a bunch of people, go somewhere else because that's not what you're going to find on this. There's lots of walking on uneven cobblestones on this trip. But if you don't want to do that, you can stay on the boat, which some people did. There was a lady who was 86 years old who went on this trip with her daughter-in-law. She did just fine. She didn't go on many of the excursions, stayed on the boat most of the time, but that was fine. There was a guy on there with his wife. He was in a wheelchair. He did just fine. No, he didn't go on the excursions either, okay? But just a lot of good people on these boats. We had a lot in common with most all of them. I mean, they were teachers, librarians, accountants, salesmen, lawyers, engineers, most of which retired. Not all, but most. Most were at least as old as us. Many were older. And your topics for discussion amongst us were kind of what old people talk about. We talked about grandchildren. We talked about retirement plans or what we do on retirement. Talking about caring for older parents, health challenges, things like that. Okay. That's what you're going to get on a cruise like this. I will say that I think I mentioned it before. I did run into a couple of people who were kind of like Debbie Downers. One guy had mentioned, yeah, I've been retired for 4 years. Then he went into the big dissertation where his company that he worked for was acquired by a big company. They totally ruined the company. And so he had to quit because he hated it. And once a week, him and some of the other guys who quit at the same time still have lunch and still damn the company they used to work for. And I'm thinking to myself, dude, 4 years ago, and now you're retired? Put it away. There was another guy who was crabbing about his recent divorce and how his ex-wife was taking all his money and his kids wouldn't talk to him. Again, maybe these were just people who, a snapshot in time, were having a bad moment. But I will say that those bad conversations made up 1/10 of the conversation we had with people. We probably met and had tours and lunch or dinner or breakfast or drinks with, I don't know, 20 different people, 30 different people. I don't know, but they were just wonderful, wonderful people. Again, it's a very social type trip. So like I said, we'll do it again, but no time soon. If you're ever considering a trip like this, I will say look into it, and I would highly recommend it because for me, it was certainly the adventure of a lifetime. Maybe this was the best vacation that I've ever had in my entire life. Consider it. Remember, you only live once and you can't take the money with you. You got to remember that. Well, that's it. I'm done. JamesStrongShow@hotmail.com. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Hope you enjoyed my my review of the Viking River cruise from Budapest to Regensberg. I went through 4 countries, Hungary, Slovakia, Austria, Germany. Hope you enjoyed it. JamesStrongShow@hotmail.com. That's my email address. If you like this podcast and you want to hear more, send me an email address. I will send you a link. I'll put you on the mailing list. That way, every time I record a podcast, which is about once a week, except for when I'm a slacker on vacation, and I'll send you a link to the podcast. You can download it and listen to it at your leisure. That's it. I'm done. Until next time, this is James Strong saying adios.